If you're hearing my voice, please consider this a warning. It's a story I've pulled from a memory I've spent my entire life trying to bury. The story of a place where reason was just a mask, and madness, well, madness held all the keys.
Funny, isn't it? That was the final, twisted lesson from the Maison de Santé, a piece of advice from a certified madman that's turned out to be the only real truth I've held on to since, a truth I learned far, far too late.
You see, my descent didn't begin with compassion or even simple curiosity. It started with a cold academic pride. I traveled all the way to a remote asylum in the south of France because I was eager, desperate really, to observe what I'd heard was a revolutionary soothing system of care.
I was so sure of myself, so utterly convinced of my own brilliant mind. I saw myself as this impartial observer, a man of science and reason, totally immune to the kind of tricks that might fool a lesser man. Looking back, that was my first and most profound delusion.
Now, looking back, my blindness was willful. The signs were everywhere, practically screaming at me. The estate itself was crumbling. The air was thick with this smell of rot, barely covered up by dying flowers, and this sad piano tune just echoed through the halls. But I saw only what I wanted to see, a grand experiment in mental health, not the tomb it so clearly was.
And then there was my host, Monsieur Maillard. He basically personified the whole estate. He was polite, well-spoken, the very picture of refined authority. But just like the house, there was something fraying at the edges of his civility, a faint tremor in his smile that I just dismissed as the strain of his important work.
As evening rolled in, Maillard invited me to this grand banquet. And it was here, in the flickering candlelight, that the real performance began. A grotesque, elegant dance that my supposedly superior mind failed utterly to comprehend.
The staff, or who I thought were the staff, were eccentric, to say the least. One woman would only peck at her food. A man poured wine from his own elbow like he was a teapot. Another one stood rigid in a corner, absolutely terrified of being nibbled on. And I rationalized it all. Harmless quirks, I told myself. Probably a method for relating to their patients.
Right in the middle of dinner, Maillard calmly explained that the soothing system was a thing of the past. It had been replaced, he said, by a much more effective method from a certain Dr. Tarr and Professor Feather. A little seed of unease was planted, but oh, my arrogance was a stubborn weed. I just nodded, choosing to be intrigued by it all.
And that's when the whole illusion just shattered. As more wine was poured, the atmosphere in the room began to curdle. The polite little eccentricities spiraled into this awful noise of shrieks and manic laughter. The masks of civility weren't just slipping, they were being torn right off. It was then that Maillard, with this absolutely terrifying glint in his eye, shared a little story, an anecdote about an asylum where the inmates, through sheer cunning, overthrew their keepers. He told it like it was a joke, laughing at the absurdity of it all. But as his laughter echoed around the room, it hit me like a jolt of ice in my veins. This wasn't a tale. It was a confession.
My composure just collapsed. The question hammered away in my skull, finally shattering my intellectual pride. If these people were the patients, and Maillard was their leader, then who in God's name were Dr. Tarr and Professor Feather?
The answer was so simple, and more horrific than I could have ever imagined. They weren't people at all. Tarr and Feather was the system. The brutal, medieval punishment the patients had inflicted on the true keepers of the asylum. The second that truth hit me, the windows of the great hall just exploded inward. The feast was over, the masquerade was at an end, and the true horror, well, it was about to take the stage. The things that stormed through that shattered glass, they weren't men. They were nightmares, demons from a fever dream. Their bodies were covered in thick, black tar, their shapes all twisted and misshapen by stuck-on feathers. They were the original staff.
So that was it. The reality of their system, horrifyingly simple. They tricked their keepers, overpowered them, and dragged them to the cells below. For a month, they had run the asylum, subjecting the staff to their own twisted form of therapy. In the chaos that erupted, I was struck down. My rational world literally tarred and feathered right before my eyes.
I honestly don't know how I escaped.
I just remember running, stumbling through the dark woods with the screams from the Maison de Santé chasing me. I was physically in one piece, but my spirit, my belief in a sane, ordered world, that was shattered forever.
For years, I was desperate. I needed some kind of framework, a rational explanation. I scoured libraries and medical archives all across the continent, searching for any mention of these men, of their theories, their system. I had to believe it was just a flawed methodology, not pure triumphant madness. I found nothing, not a single page, not one reference. The system, the doctors, the entire theory that had so intrigued my intellectual mind, it was all a fiction, a lie born and bred inside those decaying walls.
The chilling truth finally settled in. My intellect hadn't been a shield. It had been a blindfold. My absolute confidence in my own perception was the very thing that made me the perfect fool.
And so I'll leave you with the question that still haunts my nights. In that grand, grotesque theater of the mind, what should we fear more? The carefully constructed masks worn by the insane? Or the profound, arrogant blindness of those who believe themselves to be perfectly sane?